I think that's the best intro I've ever received. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about cross-channel storytelling for social marketers. So as we talk about that, I think that we can agree that you'd be hard-pressed to find a digital marketer that doesn't see the value in data. As a marketer, data fuels everything that we do, at least it should. But the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of data coming at us, and a lot of data coming at us from a lot of different places. So social media marketers are often finding it very challenging to bring the data all together into one place, to make sense of it, and then to tell a story with it. It's becoming increasingly difficult as you add new channels into the mix, and as social becomes more deeply integrated with broader marketing initiatives. So as he mentioned, I'm now I'm a product marketing manager at Simply Measured. But in my past life, I spent some time at some well-known agencies developing the strategies for some of the world's biggest brands. So as I was doing that, one of the things that I found very difficult was to understand how things worked holistically. So as I was trying to answer questions like, which network gives me the most bang for my buck, and what types of content should I use for my upcoming campaign, they were really difficult to answer. So a couple of months ago, Simply Measured did a study of 1,300 social media marketers. And I found this really interesting because I found that that problem wasn't just a problem that I was having, it was a problem that all of these other folks were having as well. So in addition to this problem, the big picture understanding, the survey found that there were 4 other things that were really difficult for them to do when they are sharing their data analysis. And all of these things boil down to one big picture, which is being able to tell a story with your data. So we just touched on the big picture understanding. The next thing we'll briefly talk about is the appropriate benchmarking and comparisons. The word appropriate is in there because there are 1,000,001 different ways to do this. You could look at period over period or rolling average. You can look at industry benchmarks, competitive benchmarks. There are a lot of different things out there. And because there are so many, sometimes it's difficult to know what to use and when to make your analysis most effective. The next thing is owned and earned media and context. And what this means is that smart marketers know that social conversations don't just happen on your own channels. So you need to look outside of those into the earned context to find out how your brand fits into the bigger picture. After that, gleaning deeper insights has been really difficult for marketers to do. I think this goes hand in hand with the big picture understanding. You need to understand what's happening holistically, but you need to dive deeper into that to understand how to hone, especially your channel specific strategies. The last thing is the complete understanding of your audience. And when we're talking about audience, we don't mean your Facebook fans or your Twitter followers. We mean, in a reporting context, the person that is consuming your deliverable. So if you are the social marketing manager and you're touching social on a day-to-day basis, you're going to want very deep insights. You're going to want channel-specific metrics. You want to dive really deeply. As you move up the chain, a marketing executive doesn't really care about the nuances of your best tweet or anything like that. They just want to see at a glance a snapshot and how things are trending along with a couple of insights. So it can be difficult for marketers to, number one, create these different deliverables because they take a lot of time and you're doing them very frequently, weekly, monthly, quarterly. And number two, to understand what information is appropriate for which marketers. So today we're going to talk about that first bullet because, like me, 51% of our respondents ranked the big picture understanding as their biggest challenge for reporting on social performance. So when you're telling the story of your data, we know that data storytelling isn't a new term, but it is increasing in popularity as marketers become more sophisticated and as they get data sets from more places, they have to put more time, energy, and resources into doing it. But how do you tell the story of your data without understanding the big picture? So there are 3 reasons why it's really difficult. First, the puzzle pieces don't seamlessly fit together. What this means is that every network has a different way of doing things. Every network wants to be their own shiny unicorn. They have different metrics. They have different weightings for each of those metrics. They don't fit together exactly. So it can be hard to tie those together, especially if you're not intimately familiar with social. And even if you are intimately familiar with social, it's easy to get bogged down on things that are too tactical. The next thing is as marketers become more sophisticated, they are moving onto networks outside of the Facebook, the Twitter, the LinkedIns of the world. This is actually really smart because you want to go where your audience is, whether it's an emerging network or something more niche. It's really important to do. But as you add those networks, it means more metrics and more things to standardize and try to comprehend. And which brings us to the third point, the problem with stakeholders. So that problem is that oftentimes, again, as you move up in the ladder, folks are not intimately familiar with social. They have a background that is more steeped in traditional marketing or advertising, and the nuances of a Facebook share versus a retweet on Twitter just aren't as important to them, and it takes a lot of education. So in order to mitigate that, you can do two things. You can standardize and normalize your cross-channel metrics, and this is going to help you put everything into context so that you can tell that big picture story better. So the first thing is standardizing your terminology. This is the key to putting massive amounts of data into context, and though it's very time-consuming, it's surprisingly simple. So when we look at these three steps, the first is to aggregate all of your data into one place. The next is to establish standardized terminology. So what this means is not Facebook fans or followers on Twitter, it's audience. Or for engagement, it's not retweets, shares, likes, comments, reblogs, repins, any of these things. You just bucket it all into one thing. And again, as marketers, we know that some types of engagement are more important than others. So if you wanted to break that down even farther, you could look at amplifications versus engagement. Amplifications being those types of interactions that are weightier because not only is a user interacting with your own content, but they're sharing it out into their communities, thus like broadening the reach. Interactions would be those that happened or stay on your own channels and aren't shared more broadly. But ultimately, once you put all of these things into standardized terminology, you can see everything in one place. It's much more clean, you have holistic context, and it ultimately makes your analysis more effective. So the first example of this is total engagement. For this particular brand, you can see the total engagement across 6 channels, and it's very obvious that Instagram is by far and large receiving the highest amount of engagement. So this next chart is brand posts by channel. So this one is especially interesting to me because you see that even though Instagram received a significantly higher amount of engagement than any of the other channels, they're only posting once per day. So if I were working on the channel strategy for this brand, I would definitely look into exploring Instagram as one of our primary channels, putting more resources into that. But I'd want to explore deeper. So as social marketers, we know that on Instagram, images perform better than videos as a whole. So knowing that I am going to put a lot of eggs in the basket of creating images, and marketers only have a finite amount of resources, sometimes we need to move things onto other channels as well. So before I spend a lot of my time and energy and budget into creating images, I want to make sure that they're also applicable for those other channels. So by segmenting all of your posts across channel by type, you can very easily see that. Another interesting thing to do with this type of chart would be content tagging. If you're tagging your content across channels, you can put it in this perspective and give you some deeper insights to share with a broader marketing team to inform your campaigns as a whole. So the next thing we'll talk about is normalizing. Again, because folks are often reporting on channels individually instead of as a whole, it's hard to make comparisons and draw insights without seeing things side by side. And even when you do put things side by side, there are often such huge audience differentiators that you're not really comparing apples to apples. So in order to do that, you can look into normalizing your data. There are a couple of examples of doing this. The first is growth rate. I really like this one because it goes beyond showing you the number of people in your audience to showing you like which channels are growing the fastest. So this is something that you'd want to track on an ongoing basis to make sure that the social network basket that you put all your eggs into is still the right one. Otherwise, it's time to reevaluate. The next thing to look at is engagement as a % of audience. This is effectively your total engagement over your total audience for each channel. And then you can see exactly which channel is resonating most with your community. So you can see on this one that, again, Instagram is the one resonating most. So this further supports that decision that we made earlier in the presentation of prioritizing Instagram. Another thing that you can do to put your data into context is benchmarking. And this is something that can be really tricky business. In order to do it completely correctly, you need to look at things like confidence intervals and regression models. And unless you have training in statistics, it can be really difficult because there are a lot of things that go into it. So primarily, marketers should use a couple of different ways to benchmark their performance against their owned activity. The first would be a rolling 3-period average. So just taking the average of your last 3 periods and comparing it to what's happening now to see how things are performing. This is really good for short-term benchmarking. And then the other option would be period over period, which is just comparing the last period to this period and seeing how things changed. I especially like to look at this in longer terms, like quarterly or annually, because they give me the most insight into how I'm trending. So, as you guys know, there are 1,000,001 things that you can do to tell your cross-channel story, but ultimately, in order to do this effectively, you need to have a holistic, big picture understanding. This is going to make your insights more effective and make the information that you're sharing across your teams more insightful and applicable to them as well. And knowing that we only discussed one of these today, we do have a white paper coming out about the other 4, plus this one, if you're interested in checking that out. And if you have any questions, I will be at the Simply Measured booth. So, thank you.